What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So now that we've kicked off 2023 completely, we are starting to get predictions from different analysts as to how things are going to play out this year in gaming. One analyst did talk about Nintendo and new hardware with a very bold prediction. We'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Sony at CES, as they actually had quite a bit to say about the PlayStation brand, and we'll also be taking a look at Nvidia and their latest video card that they've now launched, the RTX 4070 Ti, and how basically everyone online called them out for it. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're gonna start today with Madden 23 and in a very unfortunate event that's happened here when it comes to save files in the cloud, specifically for custom franchise mode, which that can rack up hundreds of hours, and we can see this posted over on the answers.ea.com website, where they say on Wednesday, December 28th, around 2:45 p.m. Eastern, players trying to access the franchise server were given an error that leagues weren't available. The issue persisted until 12:45 a.m. Eastern on Thursday, December 29th. Unfortunately, if you logged into franchise leagues during this time, your data was affected due to a data storage issue that resulted in franchise files being corrupted. They go on to say the team is currently projecting around 40% of leagues to be recovered. It's incredible stuff. That means 60% of people who logged in at the time have lost all of their data. And they do have a suggestion. If you're one of those people that lost your save file, they encourage you to start a new franchise as the mode is up and running. That sounds like a company, just putting it out there, that feels no competition, so what do they care? That's the wildest thing about this. This should be a big deal, right? They're just kind of throwing it out there on their answers page. Start a new save file. What are you gonna do? Not buy Madden 24? No, you're not gonna go anywhere else, really. And that's just kind of the attitude it feels like EA has, even in a situation that should be catastrophic. It's like, start a new save file. We'll see you guys next year when Madden 24 comes out. Also, we did get a little more information on this Last of Us multiplayer mode, as well as some information for sales, with the entire Last of Us franchise now crossing 37 million copies sold, and we are coming up on the PC release for Last of Us Part 1, which should be a big deal because this is the first time Last of Us will be going to PC at all, so I'm sure there are plenty of gamers there who will try it out for the first time. But we did also get this piece of concept art for the multiplayer mode. That's right, more concept art. Would have liked to have seen gameplay or just any kind of mention of features or their goal or plans for this thing. I assume it's going to be just a much larger factions mode, maybe similar to what we have with The Division. That would be kind of cool. But as of now, we're still kind of waiting here any other information outside of some concept art they just happen to have at the studio. Oh, and here's something to pay attention to as we start up 2023. We can see this posted up over on Twitter from Clobril, who did notice that Exoprimal, the dinosaur anthem-looking game from Capcom, is coming out in 2023, had console and cloud listed without Xbox Game Pass. This was over on the Xbox website, and they have since corrected it. So while this could have just been a mistake for their listing, it's also possible that they are prepping the idea of games that you've purchased being used through the cloud, if you'd like. That was something that was talked about as of now. Their xCloud or Game Pass cloud streaming is just that. It's only on Game Pass. But there have been talks that they would allow you to eventually play your purchased games that are not on Game Pass through cloud streaming. And I think that's just another step to convenience and tying their entire ecosystem together. And it's possible we just got an early glimpse at it with something like Exoprimal. And I think one of the best ways they can really show this feature off is pairing it with some big time releases in 2023. While Exoprimal is not necessarily a big time release that everyone's looking forward to, could just be part of maybe a launch lineup that they have planned out for using cloud streaming on games that you've purchased. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Nintendo and 2023, specifically on the hardware side. There have been talks around the Switch Pro for a long time, but ever since Digital Foundry and John Linneman mentioned that it appeared, according to what he was hearing with different developers and studios, it's been put on the back burner and it's kind of like full speed ahead for next generation with Nintendo. People have kind of cooled it on the idea of looking forward to significant hardware, I'll say, for 2023. There are still some people out there who believe there will be some sort of upgrade for their hardware like a Switch Pro next to the Legend of Zelda. I don't think that's going to be the case though. I think the Switch we have now with the OLED model is basically the roof when it comes to the premium style Switch with that OLED screen, and the fact that we saw the leak for that the Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Switch get out there, that people are still going back and forth on if that's real. To me, it makes a lot of sense for it to exist, so I'm still on the side of Team Real. But we do also have analysts talking about 2023 in gaming, and after wading through all the predictions around crypto becoming very much integrated with gaming, we'll see about that, we did come across a prediction here, which we can see this posted up over on Games Industry and being quoted by Video Games Chronicle. Says, I'm not expecting a next-gen Nintendo console in 2023. We have 2024 in our forecast. This is from Rolls Harding over at Ampere Analysis, and they do a lot when it comes to number crunching and examining the market, and yes, at times talking to many different sources behind the scenes to compile a lot of this data. So, for example, when we talk about the MPD sales, we get placements but not revenue or hard numbers. Ampere would be able to get those hard numbers. I'm sure they pay a lot of money to get that kind of reporting. But in this case, they are indeed saying that we're not expecting anything there for 2023, and that they believe The Legend of Zelda will move a lot of Switch hardware. Shocking. Yeah, obviously, The Legend of Zelda, this big-time release from Nintendo, will still work to move Switch OLED models, even though, yes, the chip inside is from 2015, and it is certainly showing its age currently with certain titles. Obviously, there are third-party ones we can look towards, but even Nintendo titles, some of the frame rates kind of struggling at times, and I am very curious to see if maybe something like Tears of the Kingdom can show us that the Switch still has a little bit left in the tank. But despite the shortcomings when it comes to the hardware and performance in games, one thing that's not a shortcoming is the sales performance as we are looking towards March to wrap up the system's 6th year on the marketplace. Take a look at this over on Twitter from Christopher Dring, saying in the UK, Nintendo Switch overtook PS5 right at the last, so like right at the end of December, I assume is what he's saying, to become the best-selling console of 2022. Remember, a system that is completing its 6th year in March beat out the PS5 in the UK as well as the Xbox to be the best-selling platform there. Now, I would assume that 2023, eventually they're going to run out of people to sell the Switch to, so wouldn't shock me if that's the last time this current Switch outsells, say, the PS5 for the entire year in the UK, but that's still an incredible milestone for the Switch to reach there, and probably one reason why, even if sales, which they are dropping, even dropping 10 to 15% year over year, you still get this kind of result. Probably shows why Nintendo is content maybe riding out the rest of this year going into 2024 before they showcase their next-gen hardware. I'm still curious if they mention it in 2023, like, yes, we are working on the successor, it is a thing, here's the code name, and we have more plans to showcase this hardware in 2024. The place they would most likely talk about that, I assume, is with investors, as they will, I'm sure, have many questions as to when the next big launch of hardware would be, as yes, that would lead to a ton of money for investors and obviously Nintendo themselves. But at this point, I would just lean towards there not being any significant hardware upgrade for 2023, and if Nintendo throws us a curveball, great, it'll be fun to be surprised. I guess the big thing you can look forward to, though, is most likely a Zelda-themed OLED Switch. It makes a ton of sense. We've seen the images, so there you go. I guess you can upgrade to that if you're still on your base Switch, or maybe hold out until 2024 and see exactly what Nintendo could have for us next generation. Next up, let's talk about Nvidia and their RTX 4070 Ti. We had just talked about the official announcement for it and how it was releasing this week. In fact, it's out today. And there were a lot of reviews that went up as the embargo lifted, and a lot of them just outright called out Nvidia for what they were really doing here, which was, yes, just rebranding and rebadging that RTX 4080 12GB model, which would have been a very weird launch now, especially as we see some of the benchmarks. Tom's Hardware had some that I think showed exactly what I'm getting at here. It was tracking pretty far behind the 4080 16GB card, and that's going to be very weird looking on paper because you figure, oh, it's 4 GB difference, right? That's the big thing. And that's seemingly what Nvidia was originally trying to pass this off as. Clearly, everyone kind of looked them sideways and said, no, this isn't a 4080, and they agreed by unlaunching it and then relaunching now as that 4070 Ti. But as I went through all these different benchmarks and checked out videos from like Gamers Nexus and Jay's 2 Cents and others, it became very clear that the pricing is just getting out of control overall for video cards. I know we talked about this with the pandemic and the crypto mining, and that just became an inflated bubble as it was. But we are seeing retailers and manufacturers really play into it now, and they're just kind of trying to extend the pricing. If you consider the idea of the generational leap we've seen in price versus performance, it's just ridiculous now. If you go back 8 years ago, I'm thinking of the GTX 970, which had its own weird thing where the amount of video RAM that they advertised wasn't necessarily what was usable or really what you got out of it. It was still a card that came out, I think the most it was like $350. That was 8 years ago. Now fast forward to here we are with the 4070 Ti coming in at $800, which, by the way, Nvidia themselves didn't produce any kind of Founders Edition, so that MSRP is, it's kind of just a made-up number that you're not actually going to get one of these cards for, since board partners like Asus or Gigabyte, what they're going to do is mark the price up so, they actually make money. And looking around the internet, the biggest thing I've seen is just a ton of backlash for this card, which is kind of a shame in the sense that if it was priced correctly, I think it would be a very compelling video card. If you look at the benchmarks, it is right there with the 3090 Ti. It's not in line with what Nvidia tried to claim with their marketing, where they said it was almost a 2 times jump from the 3090 Ti. Those were very clearly cherry-picked results that they had. But still, being right there at a 3090 Ti, which is a card that has been going for, with the crypto boom, it was like $2,000+ easy. It's now fallen to like a $1,000 to $1,100. This card, the 4070 Ti, being more efficient, yes, it should be a better value overall, but because the crypto market and everything happened with the pandemic really pushed the pricing up, we're now sitting at brackets that most people are just priced out of completely, and there's no point really getting into the 40 series cards unless you're willing to spend upwards of $1,000. I guess on one hand, it's good to see that I'm not the only one who misses the budget battle back in the day between video cards that would come out at $150 to $200 and punch well above their weight class. Now the weight class has gotten much, much larger, but will Nvidia get the message here? Well, it seems that very recently, they've turned in a pretty poor sales report to where they've hit the lowest mark in 20 years when it comes to video cards that they've sold. So maybe they're at least seeing the market and how it's reacting now, and maybe in the next generation, they lead with better pricing and better performance per dollar spent. But I guess we'll see. The thing that Nvidia really has on their side is, what else are you gonna do? Where else are you gonna go to buy cards? AMD? Yeah, you guys know we got them beat. Where else are you gonna go? That's kind of the way it's worked out now. So until we get more competition that's actually serious, Nvidia is kind of just doing what they want. Next up, let's talk about Sony at CES. I was watching the presentation live, and I was essentially looking for a lot of the really gaming-centric stuff, but I did kind of go into their mobility section a little bit because I wanted to see if they actually tried to put a PS5 in the car itself. We'll get to that. First, though, we'll start from the top. They did talk about Gran Turismo, specifically the AI that Sony and Polyphony created together in a collaboration, and they also talked about maybe QA sort of in the future with AI, which is something that would play into just overall game development and getting games out a bit faster than they do now. Also, they talked about the Gran Turismo movie. If you're unsure of the plot, it follows the true story of a Gran Turismo player who went from the game to becoming a professional driver in real life. Okay, that's kind of cool. I guess that's in theaters this summer. They did talk about live service games a lot, and specifically they had Haven Studios and Bungie show up on screen. So yes, Haven Studios is indeed developing a live service game, or maybe even live service environment. I still have questions as to what they're making and if they could be making a PlayStation Home-like experience, but still a ways off, I think, from seeing anything tangible there. There's also a lot of talk around virtual and real worlds merging, with metaverse getting thrown around all over the place, which I do think their VR headset will play into that eventually. Speaking of which, we did have Jim Ryan show up on stage talking about more than 30 games at launch. Gran Turismo 7, by the way, that will get a free upgrade for VR, so it's not common to see Jim Ryan show up and say free and upgrade in the same sentence, but he did it here. February 22nd, of course, is when the VR headset will release with that upgrade and all the launch titles mentioned, along with apparently Beat Saber. That's going to PlayStation VR 2, very popular game, so it makes sense why it would make the jump. They also showed off a new controller that's specifically designed with accessibility in mind, kind of similar to the adaptive controller that Microsoft is creating, specifically the idea, not necessarily the shape or anything that they've done here, because it is a very interesting looking controller. It's titled Project Leonardo, and they still have more information to share in the future, but really cool to see Sony also taking the initiative and working on something like that. I hope Nintendo in the future does the same thing so that all three major platform holders have access for controllers like that. And he also said the PS5 has now sold more than 30 million systems, and it appears a lot of the stock and supply issues they're running into has been resolved, and it should be much easier to get one of these systems going forward. After Jim Ryan left the stage, we then had Honda and Sony drive a car out onto the stage. This is part of their new electric vehicle initiative, their brand that they're doing, Afeela. That's the new car brand. They're going to be delivering it to customers in 2026. They have still quite a ways off there, but they did go through a bunch of different things when it comes to entertainment in the car, which the idea, I guess, in the future is your car will drive you to your destination so you can do all kinds of stuff while you're in the car, whether it's maybe working or productivity or just playing games and watching movies. And yeah, they not only had Epic Games show up talking about Unreal Engine, how it'll be integrated into their mobility setup and program, but they also showed off PlayStation 5 games. I think they will try to put a PS5 of some kind in a car, and when you're driving to your destination, you can catch up on, I don't know, Horizon Forbidden West, or you can play Gran Turismo while being driven by a car in real life. But that's about where I had to stop so I could record for Newswave, and I'll check out if anything else happened at CES and make a follow-up video if I need to, but seemed like that was the big push for PlayStation, which did center around PSVR 2, kind of as expected, but the accessibility controller was also a really cool thing to see there. So based on their last time that I remember at CES that had any meaningful PlayStation stuff there, that being the PS5 logo reveal, this was a bit better. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a tweet that appeared to shock the gaming world. That has to do with exactly how long it takes to create a game and how some developers and studios right now are probably starting up development for a PlayStation 6. Yeah, this is posted up by Jason Schreier, who said, fun fact, video game production cycles have gotten so long that if a big budget game studio started working on a brand new project today, it would likely be for the PlayStation 6. Okay, so the PlayStation 6, remember Microsoft mentioned that they are thinking PlayStation 6 and the next Xbox would release 2028 or maybe the year after. So yeah, it would be about 5 years off, 6 years technically if they launched in the holiday season for 2028. That's about how long a lot of these gaming development cycles have become. So Jason Schreier is making a pretty good point here. Now, you could also see cross-generation, so maybe they'd still target the PlayStation 5, but the PS6 would be in mind. And that kind of comes back to the idea of, are we getting a little out of control when it comes to game development and, yes, production costs? Now, production costs aside, because you're going to end up spending a lot of money even if you develop a game faster, since you're probably going to hire on more people and just take up more resources. But if you consider the fact that even Nintendo seems to be struggling with this, the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom appears to be launching 6 years, more than 6 years after Breath of the Wild released, and it's going to be based using the same engine and all this. That's the longest we've gone between large 3D Zelda games. But that's the biggest thing now is all three of these companies appear to be struggling with it for platform holders, and then you get into third parties who continue to push expectations up higher and higher and higher, and you see what's happened with companies like Rockstar even, where we used to get Grand Theft Auto games all the time, and now we've been waiting multiple generations for GTA 6. And while I'd like to think that there's an end in sight, I don't necessarily believe there is, not until something completely breaks in the industry, because you feel like we could get to a position where each studio develops one game per generation for these AAA projects and then moves on to the next system, which is wild stuff to think about. I have seen some people mention that AI could end up playing a big role when it comes to game development, specifically on the quality assurance side, as AI could be trained to find different bugs and issues in the game to be corrected. But as of now, until that gets figured out, it seems like production times are just ballooning more and more. And yeah, I guess if you're developing now, you might want to start looking towards that PS6. And then when that one's done, start looking to the PS7. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. We're asked, how long do you prefer single player games to be for an initial playthrough? 36% say 10 to 20 hours, 26% 20 to 30. But look at this, 21% said 40 or more hours. This is tough because there is an obvious sweet spot to where you feel like the game is moving along pretty well to where it's overstaying its welcome. And I think somewhere in that 10 to 30 hour mark is the sweet spot to figure out. 40 or more hours to me is really the idea of I want as much time as possible out of this game, because I spent $70 on it as an example. I want this open world game to just last forever. And I understand there's an audience for that, but for me, I'm getting to a point where I sort of prefer the 15 to 20 hour experience that moves along really, really well, is well paced and all this. And I feel like gives me a good experience from start to finish, rather than have times where I'm just like, oh, it just keeps going on and on and on. It feels bloated. Once a game feels bloated, to me, it's too long. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Christoph saying, the one collab I would love to see from Nintendo and Bandai Namco is Xenosaga. IP owned by Bandai Namco, and Nintendo, of course, owns Monolith Soft now. I would love to see this trilogy make such a return to the Switch. I think that'd be a really cool, especially since Xenosaga 3, the pricing on that on the PS2 has gotten a bit out of hand. However, if you remember, and we talked about this on the channel 3 or so years ago, there was a Xenosaga collection that apparently had progressed to a plan to be remastered, but failed in the profitable market analysis. Essentially, it got at least to the point where they were trying to figure out if the money added up and they were able to turn a profit on it, and they said they wouldn't be able to. So I'd like to think they revisit that, because they did something with Dot Hack, and I think that worked out well enough, and it was cool to see a compilation of Dot Hack GU. I think it'd be awesome to see a compilation of Xenosaga, but is the money there? I think that's still the question. I'm hoping Bandai Namco figured it out, and maybe that's a fun surprise they have up their sleeve for us in the next year or two. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. We're Sony at CES with their PlayStation VR 2, or what about Nintendo and next generation? Do you think they still have some other surprise for us when it comes to hardware in 2023? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.